Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. You know how it goes, right?
Yeah.
Blink, and the whole world of trade seems to shift again.
It really does move fast.
Yeah. We've got a fresh stack of news and notes on Trump's tariffs, the ongoing, back and forth, especially with China.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also seeing how other countries are kind of trying to navigate all this.
Yeah, finding their footing.
Exactly. So our job today, basically cut through the noise, give you the straight scoop on what's actually happening, why, and maybe what it could mean for, businesses, the global economy.
Without the headache.
Right, without making your brain feel like scrambled eggs, ready to jump in.
Absolutely. It's definitely a dynamic situation. We're seeing some pretty interesting moves and, counter moves happening.
Like what?
Well, from the U.S. stance on tariffs to China's efforts to sort of build alliances and even some unexpected links in areas like fisheries, believe it or not. It's all kind of tied together.
Okay, fisheries. Intriguing. But first, one of the big things we saw was Trump really doubling down on his idea that these tariffs are bringing companies rushing back to the U.S.
Right, the reshoring argument.
Yeah, he threw out names like Whirlpool, car companies as, proof. And then this huge number, $7 trillion in new business potentially coming to America.
Yeah, that $7 trillion figure, it's eye-catching.
I mean, wow, $7 trillion. What's the real story there? Is that actually happening?
Well, look, we are seeing some movement, especially in high tech, right? Like chip manufacturing.
Like the Taiwan semiconductor plant in Arizona.
Exactly. That's a prime example. And yes, that's likely influenced by tariffs, the whole push for, domestic production.
Okay.
However, that $7 trillion number, it's, let's say, a very optimistic projection.
Mm-hmm.
Companies decide where to build based on a whole mix of things: taxes, labor, market access. Tariffs are just one piece.
Right. It's never just one single thing.
Exactly. So while some reshoring is definitely happening, you got to take that specific number with a healthy grain of salt.
Got it. Healthy skepticism applied. Now, the China situation, that just keeps going, doesn't it?
The main event, really.
Trump's talking ongoing negotiations, but also floated hiking tariffs on Chinese goods way, way up. He mentioned over 125%.
Which is huge.
But then he also said, well, they could go lower if people still buy the stuff anyway. It feels like a bit of a guessing game from the outside.
It really does inject uncertainty. And remember, the sources point out, current tariffs on some Chinese goods, they're already up around, 145% if you include the previous rounds.
Wow, okay, so 145% is already the baseline for some things.
Exactly. So suggesting even more increases, that definitely impacts importers, consumers, everyone.
And wasn't there something about a TikTok deal being linked to this?
Yeah, that's noteworthy too. The idea of easing some tariffs, maybe as part of a potential TikTok arrangement that's apparently on hold now, directly tied to these bigger tariff talks.
Huh. So it really shows how all these different policy bits are connected.
Absolutely interconnected.
And he wants to deal with China in the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
That feels ambitious.
Yeah. Aggressive might be the word, considering how complex these trade issues usually are.
Right. And his stance is basically, if there's no deal, the U.S. just sets its own rules, its own tariffs, and, other countries can take it or leave it.
It's a very unilateral approach, to put it mildly. Very assertive.
Yeah, assertive is one way to put it.
I mean, it could force a quick resolution, maybe, but it also risks, really straining relationships with trading partners.
Especially when the U.S. already has those 25% tariffs on big things like cars, steel, aluminum.
Correct. And the talk of adding more on pharmaceuticals, medicines, computer chips to push domestic production, it signals a very clear direction.
Okay, so switching gears slightly.
Yeah.
China's not just sitting back, right? Xi Jinping was recently in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. A significant trip.
Talking about China's market being open, pushing back against what he called U.S. unilateral bullying. Even Trump commented on that meeting, so clearly the tension is still high.
Oh, absolutely.
What's the thinking behind China reaching out to places like Vietnam right now?
Well, it's a key diplomatic move. It shows China wants to strengthen its regional ties, present itself as an economic leader in Asia, particularly, with all this U.S. trade pressure.
Yeah, kind of that counter-narrative.
Exactly. Emphasizing market openness is a direct response to criticism about their own trade practices.
Now, on the tech side, it feels like the U.S. is really tightening the screws.
Definitely seeing that. More restrictions, even on that NVIDIA H20 chip, the one specifically designed for the Chinese market.
Right. And this report about DeepSeek, the Chinese AI company, identified as a potential security threat by a U.S. House committee. That sounds serious.
It is serious. You've got allegations about ties to the Chinese military, trying to get around export controls to get NVIDIA chips. Yeah, it's raising big concerns. There's even talk about possibly banning Americans from using DeepSeek services.
Wow. So this really reflects that growing U.S. worry about tech and national security, especially with China.
Precisely. The U.S. government is clearly trying to limit China's access to the most advanced tech, especially anything with potential military use.
And asking NVIDIA for details on who's buying lots of chips. That sounds like they're laying groundwork for maybe even stricter controls down the line.
It certainly suggests that, yeah, a move towards tighter scrutiny, potentially stricter sanctions.
But then it's such a contrast, isn't it?
Yeah.
NVIDIA's CEO, Huang visiting Beijing.
Right, and getting a pretty warm welcome, apparently.
Yeah, despite some past comments that weren't exactly popular over there, it just shows how much China still needs NVIDIA's tech, doesn't it? Especially for AI.
It really highlights that need. It feels like Huang is trying to walk this incredibly fine line.
Totally. Balancing U.S. rules, China's desperate need for chips, and of course protecting NVIDIA's huge market share. He doesn't want to lose all that revenue.
It's a perfect example of how deep those economic links still are, even with all the tension. China needs the chips for its tech goals. NVIDIA needs the market.
It's a delicate dance.
A very delicate balancing act, yeah, where economic reality often trumps the political noise.
And it's not just Vietnam China's talking to. She also went to Malaysia, right? And they agreed on mutual visa-free travel.
Another interesting development.
There's some buzz that this could become like a new pathway for Chinese citizens looking to emigrate, maybe.
That's the speculation, yeah. And perhaps Malaysia sees it as a way to boost tourism, maybe attract some capital flowing out of China.
It's fascinating how these big trade and political moves can ripple out into social and economic stuff like that.
Absolutely. The visa deal could have several layers. Officially, it's tourism, cultural exchange. But the emigration talk points to maybe some underlying economic or social pressures inside China.
And Malaysia gets tourists, maybe investment.
Yeah.
Win-win.
Potentially, yeah. Significant economic benefits for Malaysia. Although that detail about Xi apparently reading from a script during the meeting.
Oh, yeah. What does that suggest?
Well, it might suggest the central government's focus is really on domestic stuff right now. Economy, politics, military, maybe less bandwidth for nuanced diplomacy. Just a possibility.
Interesting detail. And China's also trying hard to project economic strength, isn't it? Their foreign ministry tweeting GDP growth figures.
Right, pushing back against U.S. pressure, trying to control the narrative.
But as always, there are questions about how accurate that data really is.
Skepticism about official economic data is always wise, not just for China.
And then you get these like really nationalistic claims popping up.
Yeah.
The idea that the U.S. dollar's credibility is somehow backed by China, that one made me pause.
Yeah, that one doesn't quite check with standard economics. I mean, yes, China holds a lot of U.S. Treasury bonds, a huge amount. But saying that's the main reason for the dollar's strength, that ignores, well, everything else. The U.S. economy itself, interest rates, its role as the global reserve currency for decades, it's much more complex.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it is still weird, isn't it? Despite all the friction, China keeps buying more U.S. Treasury bonds.
It is interesting.
You'd think they might look elsewhere, somewhere less politically charged.
But where? That's the challenge. The U.S. Treasury market is still seen as one of the safest, most liquid places in the world to park massive amounts of capital.
So lack of better options, basically.
For the sheer scale of China's reserves, finding truly comparable, stable alternatives is really, really difficult.
Okay, so back to alliances. China's definitely looking for friends to counter the U.S., not just Malaysia. Vietnam and South Korea are planning to boost trade massively.
Yeah, aiming for $150 billion by 2030, reportedly.
That sounds like a deliberate strategy, right?
Yeah.
Create a buffer against potential fallout from U.S. tariffs.
It looks that way. This kind of regional cooperation is almost a direct result of the uncertainty coming from U.S. policy. Countries want to diversify, build resilience.
And Vietnam seems keen, especially with Xi emphasizing market openness during his visit.
Vietnam is in a position to benefit significantly, strengthening ties with both China and South Korea as supply chains maybe shift around.
Meanwhile, you've got Italy's Prime Minister Meloni visiting the U.S., and the EU wants a zero tariff deal.
It seems like Europe is also trying to tread carefully here.
Trying not to get caught in the crossfire.
Exactly. They want to keep access to both the U.S. and Chinese markets, ideally without getting dragged into an escalating trade war. A zero tariff deal with the U.S. would be a huge boost for them.
Makes sense. Now, our sources also touched on a few other bits and pieces, maybe less headline-grabbing, but still relevant.
Yeah.
Like the idea that maybe the U.S. strategy is partly about pushing for decoupling from China by offering better deals, lower tariffs to the EU instead.
That's a plausible angle, yeah. Trading access for alignment, potentially.
And we saw those reports about some importers just abandoning their goods at ports rather than pay the super high tariff.
Right. That really shows the real-world pain these tariffs can cause. It suggests the cost burden is just becoming unbearable for some businesses.
Makes you wonder if, maybe subconsciously or not, a complete decoupling is kind of a long-term U.S. goal.
It could be an unintended consequence, or perhaps, yeah, part of a deliberate strategy to fundamentally reduce reliance on Chinese imports over time. Hard to say for sure.
And we shouldn't forget the pushback within the U.S. either. Governor Newsom in California suing over the tariff policy.
Right, arguing it stifles global trade.
That shows there's definitely disagreement domestically, and these legal challenges could throw another wrench in the works.
Absolutely. Legal fights can create huge uncertainty and potentially change how these policies are even implemented. It really highlights the different views within the U.S. itself.
And just to round out the global picture, we had reminders about retaliatory tariffs hitting back like Canada did in the past. And now South Africa is actively looking to diversify its exports away from traditional partners towards Asia, Europe, the Middle East.
Yeah, it underscores how interconnected everything is. Tariffs in one place cause ripples, reactions, and real shifts in trade patterns everywhere else. It's not in a vacuum.
Definitely not. Okay, and finally, fisheries. I found this fascinating.
Me too, actually.
Trump signing orders affecting Pacific fisheries, especially helping American Samoa get back traditional fishing grounds.
Yeah, that's such a concrete example of how these high-level trade and regulatory decisions hit specific communities.
Really. Their economy is so dependent on the tuna industry. This could be huge for them.
It really shows the very localized but significant impacts these policies can have. Regaining access could make a massive difference to livelihoods there.
And it also highlighted the challenges U.S. fishermen face, right?
Yeah.
Competition from foreign boats, allegations of dumping.
Yeah, from Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Taiwanese vessels near the U.S. zone.
It just paints a picture of how tough that global seafood market is. Complex regulations, intense competition.
The seafood industry is almost like a mini version of all the bigger global trade issues, isn't it? Domestic producers versus international competition, navigating regulations.
Yeah. So the efforts mentioned to maybe streamline U.S. regulations, make them more reasonable, that sounds like it could actually help U.S. fishermen compete better.
It could definitely help level the playing field a bit, improve their competitiveness if done right.
Okay. So putting this all together, wow, it really feels like we're just swimming in uncertainty right now.
That's the key takeaway, I think. Uncertainty.
These tariff policies, they're creating so many unknowns. For the Fed, for businesses trying to make plans, for investors.
Absolutely. That kind of unpredictability, it makes markets jittery, makes it hard for companies to commit to long-term investments.
And the whole thing about potentially pushing allies away, that doesn't feel like a great long-term plan either, does it?
Generally, no. Those relationships matter. A more coordinated approach globally is usually more effective for tackling big economic challenges. Alienating allies can backfire in ways beyond just trade.
So where does it all go? Could the economy power through this and get better? Or are we looking at a serious downturn that just feels completely up in the air?
The range of possibilities is really wide. So much depends on how these policies actually play out, how other countries continue to react. It's going to be interesting to watch in the coming months and years.
Well, we certainly hope the surgery is over, as one source put it.
Yeah.
And we will absolutely keep tracking all of this for you.
Agreed. It's a major ongoing story with huge implications. We'll stay on it.
Okay. And on that note, here's something to chew on until next time. Thinking about this whole tangled web of global trade, what are some of the less obvious ripple effects from these tariffs? Things may be hiding below the surface, beyond the main headlines. Consider the long game, for international relations, the shape of the global economy down the road. Lots to think about. Until our next deep dive, keep thinking.